Every person in the USA has probably seen the commercials by law firms willing to represent victims of the water contamination at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Many Marines, civilians, and their families were poisoned by the contaminated groundwater. Many people saw the film Erin Brockovich, where Julia Roberts gathered samples of water from an industrial site in defense of people living nearby who suffered and died from various cancers, and won a huge settlement against Pacific Gas and Electric in California on July 2, 1996 for $333 million, around $650 million today. But the real crime supporting the huge payout was the cover-up by PG&E. But the Camp Lejeune case is much larger, involving the federal government. The Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration denied claims for decades, very similar to their resistance to including Agent Orange health-related issues to Vietnam veterans until forced to accept those cases. But why? Let's find out. What caused the contamination? Why was there a cover-up? Who was involved? Why has this problem never been fully resolved? How many people were affected? And how? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. It is believed that almost 200,000 Marines, sailors, and probably an equal number of their dependents and civilian workers were poisoned over 5 decades. Investigations kept stating several causes, from farmer runoff from fertilizers and much later from some illegal dumping of dangerous chemicals. But the federal government claimed that it was a North Carolina state issue, not the government, which was problematic because then, under North Carolina's statute of repose, no civil tort lawsuit can be filed after more than 10 years. This law effectively blocked Camp Lejeune victims from bringing lawsuits seeking financial compensation. In 2012, the Cheney-Ensminger Act was passed, authorizing the U.S. government to pay medical care costs to family members harmed by the contaminated water at Camp Lejeune. But the Ensminger Act had limitations. It was basically a disability benefits case. Worse, Marines' families were excluded. In 2016, multi-district litigation involving 850 former Camp Lejeune residents, Straw v. the United States, was dismissed based on the North Carolina repose statute. Many members of Congress, especially those who were veterans, believed that Marines and their families should not be limited to just VA benefits, which are hard enough to obtain, which led to the Camp Lejeune Justice Act of 2022. But it is still an uphill battle, even when the evidence was presented. One source for much of this information comes from one of our loyal viewers with first-person experience, and I quote, paraphrasing, "The base public relations then went on to say, after water testing in 1982, they found 4 or possibly 5 dangerous chemicals in the drinking water. Everything the base PR said is not true. It would appear that the contamination was not an accident, but a terrible crime that made thousands of Marines and their wives and children sick, many with serious diseases that lasted a lifetime, and many died, never knowing it was the water. The in-depth testing determined that 9 dangerous chemicals, not 4 or 5, were in the water. All are known carcinogens, and this was known by the base authorities in March 1965. The secret was kept until 1982, when they were forced to test the water. Camp Lejeune water supplies are very interconnected. 4 months after arriving at Camp Lejeune and working near the water as well as consuming it, I started having unusual medical problems, losing weight, nosebleeds, coughing up blood, fevers, thrombosis in the testicles, pains in the kidneys, groin, and more. I worked right at the water's edge, helping with various weapons classes. There were occasional complaints about the smell, but I thought it had to do with the water shifting like the smell of a low tide. One evening in January of 1965, after class, I noticed a truck backing up to the water on a dirt trail nearby. The back of the truck opened and 2 men started emptying barrels of a colored fluid directly into the reservoir. When they left, I noticed a grease-like film over the top of the water in that area and spreading outward. I became concerned and told 2 friends about it, but was told, "Don't complain, just stay out of it." I started keeping notes of the truck's arrival and dumping. During that time, I noticed a different truck that was smaller but also dumping barrels of fluid into the water. I went to pick up my laundry, which was delivered to the base a few times a week, and recognized the truck. I started questioning the truck driver under the pretense that I was doing some research on chemicals for a course I was taking. He gave me the name of the chemicals, which I recorded in my notes. After a few weeks, I asked him about the dumping of the barrels into the reservoir, and his attitude changed. I directly asked him if he thought it was illegal. He responded that they had approval from the base authority. Much later, I found out who the authority was. As a matter of fact, he said the local chrome plating company where he drove occasionally did the same thing. So I borrowed a camera from a friend and started taking pictures of the dumping and keeping a record of how many barrels were being dumped from the large truck, which was the laundry truck, and the smaller truck, which turned out to be from the chrome plating company. Meanwhile, I was still sick often and not getting well, and so were a number of other Marines that I knew. This went on for about 7 or 8 weeks. I took my file, notes, and pictures and went to see the provost marshal. He was very busy that day, but when I mentioned it was about the water, he closed the door and became very interested in what I had to say. I told him everything I had learned and my suspicions. At first, he tried to brush it aside, and that I was probably seeing something that was normal and my imagination was getting the best of me. He then said he would need to see proof to proceed with any investigations. That's when I told him I had notes, a file, names of the chemicals, and even photos. He looked shocked. He congratulated me on trying to do the right thing and protect the base. He then asked me for all the notes, files, and photos that I had. He made sure this was the only record and told me he would take care of the matter quietly, as he did not want to cause any bad publicity for the base. I should not discuss this matter with anyone ever, and he would take care of it in-house. I left feeling I had done the right thing. 48 hours later, an MP showed up at the barrack, and I was given orders for Westpac. They got rid of me, hoping I would die in the war and never return. Many years later, I found that the provost marshal and a few others were being paid to look the other way. The chrome plating company and the laundry company both used toxic chemicals. Onslow County had a dump for toxic chemicals, but it was costly and did not cover all the chemicals needed to be disposed of. So both companies cut a deal to save money and get rid of the chemicals by paying the provost marshal and a few others to look the other way. In 1982, after a lot of complaints, the water was tested. It was found to have 4 or 5 dangerous cancer-producing chemicals in it. After a big fight, the VA decided that they would give compensation to the Marines and their families that suffered and died, although they assumed no responsibility on behalf of the base for what happened, as they considered it an accident and not the crime that it really was. They put together a limited list of cancers and serious diseases that they felt could have been responsible due to the chemicals, although no one knows for sure what those chemicals could do in the body. No tests were done to see what would really happen if you were poisoned for a few years with those chemicals. And this is where the story gets very muddy. The test was done in 1982. I reported the contamination of the water in late March of 1965. What follows are facts. Military personnel and their families were left to get sick and die for 17 more years. Then, to make matters worse, the chemicals they are reporting on were not all the chemicals. The chrome plating company was gone by 1972, so those chemicals over the next 10 years, I was told, would evaporate or sink to the bottom and not show up on a test. Quoting further, that would mean that many Marines like myself that have had operations on the bladder, kidneys, testicle problems, etc. would not be on the radar, because the chemicals the plating company was using would attack different areas, such as the bladder, kidneys, and more, even though my Camp Lejeune medical records show problems that appeared then and are still with me. In conclusion, over 160,000 Marines that served at Camp Lejeune and have applied for relief from the VA under the PACT Act, and yet, after over 2 years, only 117 have been approved, 117 out of 160,000 applications. I myself have been denied 5 times, even though I sent the medical records the size of a New York phone book. The worst part is I have never been able to have children. I blame the water. The VA is fighting every Marine or their widow's request for help, putting them through all kinds of examinations and paperwork. There is a bill, 8545, that was put in by Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina that may help. But I feel for many of the Marines that died not knowing the real cause, their wives that had miscarriages, etc. This heartbreaking report from Tony Andriuli is not an isolated incident. I, your humble narrator, personally know several Marines who had dealt with multiple cancers and other related issues. Various types of cancers, such as leukemia and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, were the diagnoses of those affected, as well as infertility, tumors, children being stillborn, and born with birth defects, autism, and deformities. Some children born seemingly healthy but were ill died young. With newborn children, congenital heart defects are common in mothers who drank and bathed in the contaminated water at Camp Lejeune. Studies strongly suggest a link between a mother's exposure to TCE during pregnancy and congenital heart defects. But the following additional illnesses have been proven to be directly caused by the chemicals in question, such as the bladder cancer, testicular cancer, brain cancer, breast cancer, esophageal cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, lung cancer, multiple myeloma, aplastic anemia, myelodysplastic syndrome, ovarian cancer, and cervical cancer. The recent science and medical evidence regarding the chemicals continue to build links to other injuries besides cancer, to include infertility and miscarriage, the birth defects, birth injuries, brain injuries, cardiac defects, fatty liver disease, neurobehavioral effects, plastic anemia and other bone marrow conditions, renal toxicity, scleroderma, hepatic steatosis, soft tissue cancers, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, and Parkinson's disease. PCE is absorbed following oral, inhalation, and dermal exposures. It travels through the bloodstream to the lungs. PCE targets the central nervous system, liver, and kidneys and accumulates in fat cells. Tetrachloroethylene also crosses the placenta and distributes it to the fetus, which is why there were so many birth defects at Camp Lejeune. As of now, there are 546,500 active administrative claims filed, and as of August 7, 2024, the deadline to file Camp Lejeune claims is now expired, and $23,400,000 has already been paid out on some cases, those numbering 117. As of February 6, 2025, 2,458 lawsuits have been filed in the Eastern District of North Carolina alone since February 2023. Many retired Marines and their families live in this area. Of those 103 cases filed, they have been dismissed, most voluntarily. But there are still 408,000 administrative claims pending before the Department of the Navy, with about 6,000 cases being reviewed for potential early settlements. Depressingly, that is only 1.5% of all claims. Leukemia and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are the main targets, but litigants want that list of illnesses expanded given what is known about the chemicals. Another illness that has recently gained a lot of momentum with regard to this issue is Parkinson's disease. The parties are currently debating what proof is needed to establish water contamination and causation. Expert testimony is under review, with the U.S. government considering objections to plaintiffs' reports. Medical exams for some plaintiffs are still being scheduled. Plaintiffs claim the DOJ's proposed medical exams are excessively long. The exams last 35 minutes to 2.6 hours, while the DOJ demands longer exams, and the court is being asked to ensure reciprocity in exam durations. The EPA did announce final rules banning all uses of trichloroethylene, TCE, and consumer uses, along with many commercial uses of perchloroethylene, PCE. These were the primary chemicals at Camp Lejeune. The government has still been fighting to disavow any compensation. The DOJ claims that they are proceeding slowly to protect confidential information, but that is a stall tactic. If people die, they can't file a claim. Congress created the CLGA in 2022 to provide victims with a new legal remedy, but the Fourth Circuit misapplied Supreme Court precedent by requiring a magic words standard for Congress to authorize jury trials against the government instead of focusing upon the obvious intent of the legislation. The government lawyers are more focused on defending itself vigorously against claims than on fulfilling the congressional mandate of the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. You would expect this garbage when suing Fortune 500 companies. Those lawyers commonly prioritize every possible legal defense over humane and timely resolution. But that is not what Congress intended here, and these kinds of tactics violate the spirit of the CLJA. In addition, under the CLJA, an individual must open an estate or be appointed in some official capacity to act as the legal representative of a deceased person. One plaintiff who filed on behalf of her deceased husband had not met those criteria. The government stated that she lacked the legal standing to proceed. However, the court did not dismiss her case. Instead, the case was stayed, allowing her time to open an estate and correct the issue. The government is, not surprisingly, trying to narrow the focus. It wants to focus just on evidence limited to the concentration of chemicals chemicals in the drinking water due to the provable deaths of civilians who worked at locations such as Hadnot Point and Midway Park, which is the on-base housing complex. Ironically, despite the government cleanup in 2012, the Hadnot Point water facility was also found to be contaminated with mercury. Mercury may have come from water pressure meters at the facility that were removed in the 1980s. For 346 months, the Tarawa Terrace water treatment and supply facility at Camp Lejeune was contaminated with dangerously high levels of PCE. The source of the contamination was identified as a nearby dry cleaning company. The EPA's maximum safe level for PCE in drinking water is 5 Ug/L. The peak level of TCE contamination in 1985 in the Camp Lejeune water supply was 215 Ug/L. That is 43 times the safe level for TCE. It is a wonder there were not more Camp Lejeune water contamination deaths and injuries than have been reported. TCE is an industrial chemical that is used in the manufacturing of refrigerants and other hydrofluorocarbons. It is a harmful chemical that is long known to be unfit for human consumption. TCE has also been used as a solvent and fumigant to kill insects. The body absorbs TCE mostly through inhalation and through oral and dermal exposure as well. The bloodstream pushes this chemical to major organs that receive blood and deposit it in the fat cells. The body metabolizes TCE mainly in the liver, kidneys, and lungs. Humans extensively metabolize inhaled doses of trichloroethylene. Metabolites may play a role in the adverse health effects described in studies. TCE was also commonly used as a solvent and degreaser on metal in military equipment. The Hadnot Point water treatment facility servicing Camp Lejeune was found to be highly contaminated with TCE. The contamination is believed to have come from numerous sources. EPA's maximum safe level for TCE in potable water is 5 parts per billion. The Camp Lejeune water supply was contaminated with TCE as high as 1,400 parts per billion. What is absolutely unfathomable is that our government will spend $1 trillion of our tax money overseas, supporting foreign countries, their populations, and militaries, but fight tooth and nail to avoid taking care of our own people harmed by criminal negligence. We brought this to light in 2 of our videos regarding the criminal negligence of FEMA and their handling of the Maui fires and Hurricane Helene, so please see our videos on those 2 travesties. I, your humble narrator, was also at Camp Lejeune from 1987 to 1988, and fortunately have not as of yet experienced any of these symptoms. We wish to thank Tony Andriuli for his personal testimony and for suggesting this video topic. We wish him and all the others affected the very best. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.